Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a really wild, heart-stopping moment in history, where brilliant intelligence gathering collides head-on with sheer civilian terror. We're going way back to 904 AD, right to the shores of the Byzantine Empire. Think about it. Long before satellites, long before modern espionage, one of the greatest cities in the world was about to be hit by a devastating naval assault, and it was orchestrated with the pinpoint precision of a modern covert op, an attack that was going to change the lives of everyone there forever.
So what actually happens when an unstoppable naval force suddenly appears at your city gates? Imagine waking up, grabbing your morning drink, looking out at the horizon, and just boom, a massive hostile fleet is sitting right there, ready to unleash absolute destruction on your home. You live in Thessaloniki, right? It's this bustling, super prosperous cultural and economic hub of the Byzantine Empire. The sea is literally the lifeblood of your city. It brings trade, it brings wealth. But on one incredibly sweltering July morning, that very same sea delivers your absolute worst nightmare right to your front door.
We actually have this hauntingly beautiful but honestly absolutely terrifying quote from the time. The ships were driven by a tailwind in such a way as to create the impression that they were not gliding over the surface of the water but floating through the air. That chilling description comes straight from John Humiliated. He was a civilian and a clergyman trapped inside the city walls. Through his first-hand account, we literally get a front-row seat to the sheer panic that was gripping the population. He talks about how the fleet caught these strong summer winds coming off Mount Olympus and seemed to just fly across the water toward them. 54 massive galleys surging right at their walls.
Now look, an invasion force like this popping out of nowhere, that wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of a massive, incredibly sophisticated intelligence network. To understand how the attackers knew exactly where and when to strike, we really have to look at this uniquely objective Arab historian named al-Masudi. See, while most contemporary Muslim authors viewed the Byzantines as just, the faceless enemy in the house of war and didn't really bother studying them, al-Masudi was different. He approached them with genuine scholarly curiosity. He dedicated himself to a fair, systematic study of their entire civilization.
What's truly fascinating here is how al-Masudi completely broke from his contemporaries. He realized that to actually understand geopolitical dynamics, you need accurate data, right? Not just dismissive propaganda. He wanted to know their geography, their religious controversies, their military provinces, and everything about their capital, Constantinople. This open-minded, inquisitive approach is what allowed him, and by extension the Islamic military apparatus, to gather incredibly detailed, actionable intelligence.
So, where did he get all this info? Well, he meticulously compiled strategic data from a wide variety of borderland contacts, basically creating a deeply accurate geopolitical map of the enemy. It was an amazingly sophisticated network. I mean, he wasn't just sitting in a library reading old books. He was out there talking to Melkite priests, veteran Muslim sailors, prisoners of war, merchants crossing the borders, even converted Byzantines. He was constantly verifying reports, cross-referencing facts, and literally piecing together the topography and defenses of the Byzantine Empire from the inside out.
And this leads to a really devastating twist of fate. Al-Masudi relied heavily on notable converts to understand those Byzantine defenses, and one of those key informants was an admiral named Leo of Tripoli. This is the exact same man who provided that deep tactical knowledge of Byzantine waterways to Muslim intelligence and, get this, the very man who would ultimately lead the terrifying naval assault on Thessaloniki. He knew the Byzantine defenses intimately because, well, he used to be a part of their world.
To John Humiliated and the terrified Byzantines staring out from the city walls, Leo of Tripoli wasn't just some brilliant strategic admiral. He was a former Christian turned absolute nightmare. Humiliated actually describes him as a sinister, untamable beast who outshone all previous paragons of impiety. Just imagine the psychological terror for the citizens of Thessaloniki, knowing that your attacker intimately understands all your society's weaknesses and has turned completely against you. That is absolutely paralyzing.
Okay, let's look at how this siege actually escalates, because this wasn't some drawn-out, months-long blockade. No, it was a rapid, ticking clock nightmare unfolding over just a few desperate summer days. Day 1, July 29th, the fleet arrives, they do their initial assessment, and that night there's a failed ladder attack from the water. Day 2 brings relentless, continuous archery, stone throwing, and this devious attempt to burn the gates. But the real turning point, that happens on the night of Day 2, with some secret naval engineering, which sets up the final breach on Day 3.
Before things go south, it's really important to note that the Byzantine defenders didn't just roll over. There was actually some early hope. Byzantine commanders bravely rallied the citizens to repel those initial terrifying assaults, keeping the sea walls secure. In fact, despite their military commanders suffering a severe injury right before the battle, the leadership stepped up. The defenders initially fought like absolute heroes. They showered the attackers with arrows and stones, taking out the men who tried to scale the walls from the water. For a brief shining moment, they held their homes securely.
But when standard frontal assaults failed, Leo of Tripoli completely changed the game overnight. Look at these steps for his floating siege towers. 1. He lashed ships together in adjacent pairs with heavy chains for stability. 2. He hoisted steering paddles way high up by the ship's masts. 3. He laid strips of wood over those suspended paddles to create a flooring. And 4. He fenced the edges with boards to create elevated, floating turrets. It was, honestly, an astonishing feat of naval engineering that completely overtopped Thessaloniki's low seawalls.
The next morning, the horror was fully unleashed in this brutal aerial barrage. From those monstrous elevated platforms, elite fighters unleashed a devastating vertical attack. We're talking giant hailstones of rock raining down, arrows shot from way above the city's defenses, and earthenware vessels filled with fire. But most terrifyingly, fire blown through tubes, essentially an early medieval flamethrower using a form of Greek fire, hurled right down onto the defenders. The city's low seawalls, which were supposed to protect them from the water, were suddenly transformed into complete death traps.
The sheer visceral terror of this fiery onslaught from the sky caused the Byzantine defenders to completely lose their nerve. They fled the walls in an absolute panic, scrambling back into the city streets. And then came the breach. A lone, incredibly daring attacker leaped down from one of the floating towers, sword in hand. He landed, probably waited a second to see if it was a trap, and realized the walls were completely deserted. He signaled the fleet, and man, the floodgates opened.
The slaughter that followed was horrific. Attackers swarmed the deserted walls, burning the gates from the inside to let the rest of the army in. Once inside, that highly disciplined naval force turned into a chaotic nightmare for the trapped civilians. Those who were paralyzed by fear or injured from leaping off the walls were massacred right in the streets. But this initial slaughter, it was actually just the bloody prelude to a highly calculated, cold-blooded military strategy.
Which brings us to this specific historical term, andropodizing. It's a premeditated, semi-lethal warfare practice of selectively enslaving a conquered populace. This concept completely reframes the grim aftermath of the siege. What happened in Thessaloniki wasn't just troops running wild and grabbing whatever they could. No, it was a methodical, premeditated economic operation designed to extract maximum wealth in the form of human capital.
To put that into perspective, let's compare general slavery with andropodizing. General slavery usually involves a broad capturing of populations. But andropodizing, it is a brutal, systematic sorting process. It's the targeted abduction of the youthful, young women, girls, and boys, because they're highly valuable, easy to transport, and a lot less likely to successfully rebel. Anyone deemed unuseful to this economic machine, like the old and infants, are simply discarded, abandoned, or killed. It is a horrifyingly efficient harvesting of a society's future.
And sadly, this was the exact fate that befell our eyewitness, John Humiliated, and thousands of other youths from the city. They were violently sorted, dragged from their homes, loaded onto those very ships, and transported all the way to Lebanon as prisoners of war held captive in Tripoli. Humiliated only survived the initial culling by basically buying temporary safety with some gold he had hidden away. He eventually wrote this harrowing account to a fellow captive while languishing in a prison cell.
So, what does this all mean? When the grand strategies of empires collide, who truly pays the ultimate price? As we look at this incredible clash between the geopolitical brilliance of al-Masudi's intelligence network, Leo of Tripoli's devastating engineering genius, and the unimaginable human suffering of the citizens of Thessalonica, we have to ask ourselves, how much of history's grand machinery is built on the backs of the discarded? When empires play their strategic games, it is invariably the civilians who pay the ultimate price. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the histories we've been told.